Hello everyone, I am Richa from Sexuality and joining us today is Atika, founder and president of Team Tarini for a quick session on oral sex. Tarini Foundation is a community working towards implementing projects based on menstrual hygiene, reproductive wellness, sex education, community building and social welfare. We are very glad to have you, Atika, with us.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Artika from Tarini Foundation, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, pervasive myths about oral sex have long existed among Indians. Yet, the concept of oral sex has indisputably emerged as the hottest and the trendest concept in today's time. A recent survey revealed that due to hygienic standards, more couples are turning to the practice of oral sex. So, Artika, let's just start from a very basic that what is oral sex and is it really common?
Okay, thank you for that question, and what a great point to start from, actually. So I'm going to briefly just define it for all functional purposes. Oral sex, or an act of oral, is stimulation of the genitals or the anus using one's mouth. Now, this stimulation can be in terms of licking, it could be in terms of kissing, it could be in terms of sucking, and in various other ways, depending on what your preferences and what you like. And that's basically what an act of oral really is. When we say oral sex, I think the connotation itself is that it is an act of pleasure. It is an act which is supposed to, be about seeking and giving pleasure between partners. And the next question was how common it is. So I would just go. You said something about, okay, because hygiene standards are now better, so people are now you think people are more likely to indulge in acts of oral now. Honestly, oral sex has always existed ever since humans have existed, and ever since they, I guess, figured out that this is a pleasuresome activity. When you say how common is it, instead of talking about the stats, which is one way to answer the question about how common it is, I would actually go another way and just talk about how oral sex is actually something that can be enjoyed and practiced by any person who's sexually active, who identifies as a person who's sexual, across the sexuality spectrum. And I just find this important to say because a lot of times, even today, even in 2021, oral sex is often categorized or often thought to be practiced only by certain groups of people, or only by certain, or only by people who identify as certain sexuality. The fact is that it's an act of pleasure, and anybody who identifies as a sexual person may want to try it, may want to practice it, may want to seek pleasure in that manner. And I think that's just important to know and acknowledge more than the stats.
Yeah, true. So the second question to you is that can a person get pregnant because of oral sex?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Just biologically, for pregnancy to happen inside the body, there needs to be an ova and there needs to be sperm. So when we talk about oral sex or any act of oral, firstly, the sperm will only come and will only exist in case the oral sex is being given to a person with a penis. And even in that case, I think what the assumption here is, and like we do get that question often, and I think the assumption here is that if a person who has an ova, or who is likely to have an ova, so has like ovaries, swallows the semen at the time of an act of oral, will that lead to pregnancy? So the answer to that is no, because even if you sort of swallow the semen, even if it is not going to reach the uterus is just a separate organ, right? So it's not going to reach the uterus. And while conception can happen, fertilization can happen in the uterus and the fallopian tubes, the whole entity, the fallopian tube, the uterus, are all separate and are only connected to the rest of your body through bloodstreams, but actually no connection through the stomach. So just for that very biological reason, an act of oral will not lead to pregnancy. And of course, when we're discussing an act of oral and a possibility of pregnancy, we're discussing it for in a very heteronomous form of oral sex, where there's a person with a penis who's the receiver, and there's a person who possibly could have an ova who's the giver. So in that sense, a very restrictive, question probably for a restrictive or a limited amount of audience, not restrictive. And no, it cannot lead to pregnancy.
Thank you. So the next question, and a very common one. So can a person get STI or STD from oral sex?
Okay, great question. And actually, I was wanting to talk about it when I was talking of pregnancy, about things that are possible through oral sex and things that are not possible. While pregnancy, is likely to not happen through an act of oral. When it comes to oral sex and infections, STIs and STDs, it is possible to actually transmit them through an act of oral for anybody. So a person with a penis who is infected can pass it on. A person with a vagina who is infected can also pass it on to their respective partners. Yeah, it is possible. And just one thing I would like to say is that a lot of people, I think, are of the belief that an act of oral cannot lead to passing of infections. So while it is possible for a lot of infections, or for a few infections at least, the chances of being passed on through oral sex are usually lesser than those through anal sex or heterosexual vaginal sex. Having said that, it is entirely possible to transmit infections through an act of oral, and and it's something that you should be mindful of actually if you're a sexually active person.
Yeah. So the next question is certainly a follow-up. So how can a person make their oral sex a more safer one?
Yeah, I love that. So, I mean, because you were talking a little bit about the cultural context earlier, the fact is that even today in India and also a lot of places outside of India, oral sex is sort of villainized as something that's out of the ordinary, but it's not. It's an act of pleasure like any other. And because it's villainized, there is not much conversation around it. So while it's possible to transmit infections through oral sex, it's also preventable. So one way to prevent it is to use, the only way to prevent it is to use physical barriers. So one would be, so if you're a person with a penis, using a condom, and if you're a person with a vagina, then using a dental dam. Now a dental dam is a physical barrier like the condom is, and again, because a dental dam is not very easily available in India or is very expensive, if it is available online sometimes in India, there is a way to actually make the dental dam using a regular condom. And we've actually got a reel on it on our profile. So if you're watching this, you can go check out that reel on our profile.
Sure. Yeah.
And a fun fact, actually, the whole flavored condom and flavored lube, product range is actually made to be used for oral sex. So because we live in the society that we do live in, dental dams have not become that popular yet. I hope they do. But basically, you can grab yourself a condom and make a dental dam as well. And that's the easiest and simplest way to prevent infection through oral. There is also something called an oral dam, which is something you can wear in your mouth while giving oral pleasure. Again, not easily available, not that feasible compared to the other methods, but also just putting it out there is an option. And while we're at this, I have to acknowledge that there are some infections which pass on through contact of skin, like herpes, for example, even some strains of HPV, for example. In that case, one might say you can still get it even if you use a dental dam or a condom. True, but by using a physical barrier protection, you reduce the chances by a really, really large margin. So definitely advisable, especially, just definitely advisable. It's actually easily accessible.
Yeah. So this is probably the last question to you. So how does a person know that if they're performing the oral sex in a right way?
Okay. Nice question, but okay, I'm going to define it how I would say it is the right way, and that would be the standard answer I would give for whether it's an act of oral or anything else, any sort of physical intimacy, or even outside of physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, anything. So I would just say it's the 3 C's. So where the first C stands for consent, which is important. It's absolutely necessary and just mandatory, if I can say that. So and now when I say consent, it doesn't matter if it's a long-term partner or somebody you're seeing casually, or if it's even a spouse or your best friend or your friend of the longest time. Consent is absolutely important to make that act sort of right this is of course my personal opinion. The second C would be comfort. So even after you've sought consent and that, you're past that step, and even if you started practicing a certain act, whether it's oral or anything else, it's a good idea to still check in that both the partners, or in case of multiple partners, the partners are all feeling comfortable, right? Because consent is one thing, but maybe once you've started on to something or you started trying something, maybe there's some sort of hesitation or maybe there's some sort of discomfort, and it's very important to acknowledge that. And a follow-up to the second C, which is comfort, is conversation. That the right way to do anything for any person, or any given number of people, is actually to figure out what the right way for you is. So while the internet is a huge place, and people have all sorts of places and books and websites and things where they may which they may turn to for information, ultimately you and the partner or partners are the only ones who are fully equipped to decide what works best for you. So it is an act of pleasure. It should not be painful, for sure. Just some basic things from the top of my head. Painful in like a very medical sense, because again, I will acknowledge kinks and fetishes, but yeah, it's an act of pleasure. So ultimately, it's such an important aspect of the whole thing to identify what works best for you. And once you know what works best for you, it's such a great place to start communicating your needs to your partners and hearing about their needs as well, and then sort of together figuring out what the right way of doing anything is. And absolutely the answer for oral sex as well.
Yeah, very beautifully answered this question. This was super insightful. Thank you so much, Artika, for enlightening our audience about the concept of oral sex. With communities like Team Tarini and with people like Artika, it has been possible to have an open discussion and conversations which have become a breeze. Hope you all enjoyed this session and this was an informative one. Sex at Manjari will be back with more such sessions like this. Till then, see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.